Hello. Well, hello, Savannah. Um, so, we've all heard about the trashes in our daily lives that can be turned into treasures. So, I'm going to take the next few moments to talk about trashes in our relationships. You may be wondering, what are these trashes in our relationships? There are so many of them, but today I'll only focus on four: bitterness, distrust, jealousy, and dishonesty, along with the godly treasures that should replace them. Bitterness is defined as anger and disappointment at being treated unfairly. Sometimes feelings of bitterness are valid feelings and only last for a short spell. These fleeting moments of anger and disappointment are to be expected because we're human and we experience a wide range of emotions. If we let bitterness linger in our relationships, it can become a grudge and can cause a whole lot of damage. The first verse that comes to mind is Hebrews 12:15. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, let any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. This verse says that the root of bitterness should not abound in us, or it will cause a lot of trouble and defile many. This is a warning of what can happen when we let bitterness dwell in our relationships. There are many examples of people in the Bible who were bitter and who allowed these temporary feelings to turn into long term problems. For example, we have Sarai in Genesis 16 who resented Hagar for giving Abraham a child when she couldn't. And then we also have Lot's wife who resented God for destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you see a trend here? I'll give you a hint. They're both women. As women, we can be a bit on the emotional side. And if you ask my husband, I might be more on the emotional side than others. But when this happens, we let the trash of bitterness tarnish our relationships with God and our friends. Now, here are a few examples of men in the Bible, so you guys don't have any bitterness against me for calling out the ladies. Jonah, in the entire book of Jonah, resented God because he thought Nineveh deserved more compassion. And the brother of the prodigal son in Luke 15, he resented both his father and his brother because he didn't get the same treatment. He stayed faithful, he did the right thing, and he didn't get a party. So I can see why he felt that way. God has given us instructions on how we can turn the trash of bitterness into a treasure that can get us into heaven. Ephesians 4, verses 31 and 32 reads, "Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you." Feelings of bitterness, wrath, anger, and clamor should not have a permanent place in our relationships. Instead, we must recycle these feelings and turn them into forgiveness, as it says in Colossians 3, verses 13. Bearing one with another and forgiving one another, if anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. So the next trash I'd like to talk about is distrust. Distrust is defined as a feeling that someone or something cannot be relied upon. For example, I have a distrustful relationship with scales. I cannot rely on them to show the weight that I want to see, so I'm blaming it on the scale, not me. As we all know, relationships are built on trust. When we can no longer trust a friend, a family member, significant other, or whomever, that relationship is practically doomed and almost impossible to repair. Let's think back to the infamous story of Judas and Jesus Iscariot in Matthew 26. Jesus knew that he would be betrayed by one of his closest friends, but I imagine it still hurt when it actually happened. Jesus trusted each of his disciples with his life and vice versa, yet Judas betrayed Jesus for a measly 30 pieces of silver. If it can happen to Jesus and his relationships back then it can certainly happen to us now. One example that comes to mind is the story between coworkers. So all the stories I'll share today are real life stories, but I'm just changing up the names and a few details, so in case some of these things may be a little more relevant, you don't know who it is. So we'll call the main character Susie. Susie had two really good friends at work. They had lunch together, they hung out outside of work, they went to the movies, they traveled together, they were best of buds. So, months into the relationship, for some unknown reason, one of Susie's friends started saying negative things about her to the other friend. Eventually, Susie started hearing personal things about her from other coworkers, and she knew it can only come from one of those two friends that she shared it with. So Susie knew it had to be one of her friends that she couldn't trust, so she stopped confiding in them, and then their relationship quickly faded. In this example, Susie's friends betrayed her, causing her to not trust their intentions and eventually distance herself from them. Susie constantly asked the questions to make sense of it all. What had she done to make her friends do this to her? And how could she remain friends with someone she couldn't trust? In times like this, or any time that our trust in others has diminished, we should turn to the Bible. As with every aspect in our lives, God has given us clear guidance on what we should do and how to navigate tough situations. Proverbs is a treasure chest of advice that can help us in our daily lives. The first verse that comes to mind relating to distress and Susie's situation is Proverbs 11, verses 13. A gossip betrays confidence, but a trustworthy friend keeps a secret. Anyone you can confide in and not worry about them sharing your innermost thoughts is truly a trustworthy friend, unlike Susie's so-called friends. Another verse that comes to mind is Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for time of adversity. It's easy to trust loved ones when times are good, but when we can do so in times of adversity, we can have someone to depend on like a brother or sister. There may be times when trust is lost in a relationship and cannot be repaired despite multiple attempts. However, if we maintain a relationship even after trust was lost, it can become stronger than ever. And the best one yet is Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Relationships with friends, family, and even spouses may fail, but we can rest assured in our relationship with God when we trust him with all of our heart and lean not on our own understanding. Another trash in our relationship that we should recycle is jealousy, which is defined as a state of feeling or showing envy of someone or their achievements and advantages. Remember the story of Leah and Rachel in Genesis 29 and 30? Jacob absolutely adored Rachel, so much that he worked 14 years for her so he can have her hand in marriage. Now you can imagine Leah was jealous of Jacob's genuine love for Rachel. And God saw how much Jacob and Rachel despised Leah, so he blessed her womb to bear many children for Jacob. Meanwhile, Rachel was barren. Now the tables have turned, and Rachel was jealous of Leah and her ability to have children for Jacob. As you can see, jealousy has no limits. In this example, it came between two sisters and damaged their relationship. This example reminds me of James 4, verses 2 and 3. You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive, because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. Instead of loving each other, Rachel and Leah competed against each other. Their hearts were filled with the trash of jealousy and contention. Their lives were filled with quarreling and fighting, which should not be the case in any relationship, especially siblings. I have a sister. I know this. The trash of jealousy reminds me of another story. Let's call the main character Olivia. Throughout her high school years, Olivia befriended a lot of people. After graduation, Olivia's circle of high school friends dwindled, but there was one friend she considered to be one of her closest gal pals. Different seasons passed in their lives, and throughout that time, Olivia graduated from college, got married, and had a career she enjoyed. Meanwhile, Olivia's friend chose a different path for herself, but it did not give her the same results. After a while, Olivia chose to feel jealous of her friend. Well, Olivia's friend became jealous of her life and successes. Olivia's friend began to distance herself from their friendship because the weight of jealousy had become too heavy to be a true friend. Olivia's friend would secretly ask herself, why was Olivia so fortunate to get all the desires of her heart? And why was God blessing her and not her, despite all of her efforts? As mentioned earlier, God has given us all we need in the Bible. If we look at Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4, it says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. This passage reminds us that we should not do things because of selfish motivations or pride, but instead put others before our own desires. If Olivia's friend remembered this verse, it could have prevented a lot of jealousy to overtake their relationship. As sisters in Christ, we should celebrate the blessings of others in their lives instead of feeling bad for ourselves if we do not receive the same treasures. This is easier said than done, I can definitely attest to that, but we have to try, especially when we know that we have a love for each other and we shouldn't be competing with each other. While others seem to achieve things with ease and we work hard for it, we shouldn't be jealous. We should help them up and congratulate them when they do well. In times like this, we must also remember the popular passage of 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 6. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoice in the truth. This passage is usually referenced in romantic relationships, but I think we can apply it to all relationships. The love we have for others should be many things, as this passage suggests, but jealousy is not one of them. And the last trash I want to talk about today is dishonesty, which is defined as deceitfulness shown in someone's character or behavior. I'm sure we've all had some kind of experience with someone being dishonest in our relationship, and we know exactly how this feels. This trash cup sometimes goes hand in hand with distrust, and its effects can also be irreversible. One of the first Bible stories that we learned as children was one of dishonesty and deceit involving Adam, Eve, and the serpent in Genesis 3. In this relationship triangle, the serpent was dishonest with the couple, twisting the words of God in order to persuade Adam and Eve to be disobedient. Adam and Eve thought that they could trust the serpent, but they ultimately learned that he did not have their best interest in mind. When thinking of relationships and possible serpents, we have to remind ourselves of Malachi 3, verses 18. Then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him. Unfortunately, not everyone will want the best for us, and this was a very hard lesson for me to learn. I guess I'm still learning it now. As the passage says, we must use our judgment to discern between those with evil and righteous intentions. This is especially true when it comes to discerning between the honest and dishonest people in our lives. Now here's another example of dishonesty. It's not as dangerous as what the serpent did, but it illustrates how the trash of dishonesty, whether big or small, can hurt relationships. We will call the main character Tammy. Tammy loves to shop, especially when she can find the finer things in life for a fraction of the cost. So while out, Tammy will pick up a dress here, a shirt there, some trinkets for some friends, whatever she can find for a good deal, she'll buy it. At first, Tammy's husband was okay with the amount of purchases she made, but after a while, he didn't think all of that was necessary. As not to offend her husband, Tammy would purchase items and keep them in her car, hide them in the closet, or in the spare room. She was not letting him see it, but she wasn't stopping. So her husband thought that her shopping habit had calmed down and commended her for kicking that urge. One day, however, Tammy's husband stumbled across some receipts of things that he had never seen before. So he asked her about these newly discovered purchases. She apologized and revealed that she had bought a lot of things and hid them from him. The Bible warns us that people will deceive us. In Psalms 10, verse 7, His mouth is full of lies and threats. Trouble and evil are under his tongue. Tammy probably didn't think this, but a lie is a lie. and she was hiding things from her husband. It's hard to interact with strangers who are dishonest and deceive us, but it's even harder when people who are closest to us are the ones to do this to us. When this happens, we may question other things that they do and things that they've told us because their word is no longer their bond. 1 Peter 3, verses 10 reminds us of what happens if we stay away from dishonesty and deceit. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. We should only speak truth to one another as we are instructed to do in Ephesians 4, verses 25. Therefore, put away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Tammy should have also read 1 John 3, verses 18. Instead of being dishonest with her husband, it reads, "My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth." We show our love for others, especially our spouses, by being honest with them. When our actions match our words, others know that we are serious about our love for them and not just speaking vain words. As I come to a close, there are many trashes in our lives that separate our relationships, and if not recycled, can separate us from God. As sisters in Christ, we should not hold on to the trashes of bitterness, but we should forgive one another. We should not hold on to the trash of being distrustful, but being a trustworthy friend. We should not hold on to the trash of jealousy, but love one another. And we should not hold on to the trash of dishonesty, but be a truthful companion. As my lesson comes to an end, I want to leave this passage with you. 1 Peter 4, verses 8 through 10. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others, as faithful steward of God's grace in various forms. In all of our relationships, we should strive to love one another at all times and do so without complaining, and as faithful stewards. Our relationships may encounter rough patches, but we must do the best to resolve them with love, as love is the greatest treasure that we can possess in all of our relationships. Thank you.